Sequels can be a wonderful thing. They can evolve the characters, enrich their story, and catch us up with our cinematic friends. They also have the ability to make the original feel like a stinky mess by getting rid of everything from the first movie. You know, like the main star. Will this sequel be sweet or sour? Find out as we endeavor to see if Speed 2 Cruise Control is not that bad. Welcome one and all to It's Not That Bad, the podcast that looks for A grades in B movies. Now, I have to admit that there are some franchises where it begins and ends usually with the first movie, and then you're surprised when you realize that there are sequels. This is sort of one of those situations because up until preparing for this episode, I had lived and died by the very first entry of this franchise. I knew the sequel existed. I was avoiding the sequel like the plague. But then Peter from the Movie Duel podcast shows up and says, hey, why don't we watch Speed 2 Cruise Control? And I'm like, he did it. He said the thing. Pete, welcome back to the show. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing really well, thank you, Jason. I'm looking forward to sort of defending this choice. It's going to be very, very tough, but I'm prepared, I think.
Now, I'm going to ask you, before we get into deep diving into this film, when it came time to pick a movie, and the first thing apparently that came to your mind was Speed 2 Cruise Control, I must ask, why do you hate me so? I mean, why pick this movie?
Well, it was threefold, really. First of all, my first two choices on coming on your podcast have been reasonably safe, I would say. Quite, close to that 60% Rotten Tomato score that's sort of the benchmark. So I thought this time, it's go hard or go home. It's got to be a something a bit meatier and something to really, really try and defend, I suppose. Secondly, was that sort of tomato meter score of 4%. I'll from the get-go, I'll say I'm not going to sit here and say that this film is any kind of masterpiece or forgotten gem or anything like that. But I don't think it's worth 4% on Rotten Tomatoes. And thirdly, I think that this is the first film that I went to see at the cinema without parents or older siblings or anything like that. So this was, I'm pretty sure this was the first film I went to see of my own volition.
That's always fascinating because, I remember growing up and, going to see a lot of movies, in the theater. And my mom was a big movie buff, still is a big movie buff, and bringing me to the theater. So I was introduced to a lot of films, but then it comes to that point where it's like, okay, I'm going to go to the movies by myself or with a friend, and that still qualifies, right? Yeah. I think for me, it was probably Transformers the movie. Because I'm pretty sure I watched that about 3, 4, or 5 times in the theaters and then rented it ad nauseum to the point where I could quote it. But it's always fascinating to find out what that first solo sojourn to the cinema is. And you got Speed 2. I'm sorry?
Well, it was either that or The Lost World. It's one of the two. I'm not quite sure. I mean, release dates can be a little bit janky, certainly in 1997 between the US and the UK. So it could have been The Lost World, which is a slightly better choice, but we'll see.
I was about to say, if your choices of at the theater are you can go to Speed 2 or you can go to The Lost World, that's like saying, do you want the sandwich or the shawarma?
Yeah. Well, I did see both. I definitely saw both at the cinema with the same friend as well. So it could have been The Lost World, but I'm pretty sure it was Speed 2.
Now everyone's sitting there going, shawarma, that's a great name for a band. Probably a punk band, but regardless of... Before we dive into Speed 2, Cruise Control, it is time to take this Sandra Bullock sequel, this shawarma, if you will, and trailerize it.
There are few things worse than the horror of having to deal with public transit. Having to deal with vacation transit is one of those things, and Annie Porter hates both. Sandra Bullock returns to a franchise that looks nothing like the first movie in Speed 2, Cruise Control. The first time out, she can't allow the bus to stop. And in the sequel, she can't allow the action genre cash cow to stop. But hey, if you want to make hope floats, you need to get on a sinking ship. Along for the ride is not Keanu Reeves, also known as Jason Patrick. Together, they'll try to stop Willem Dafoe from crashing the ship into an oil tanker. And by together, I mean he does all the work while she gets all the acclaim. Sweet deal. Climb aboard as we set sail for Speed 2 Cruise Control. Rated PG-13 for paycheck grabback.
It should be noted, apparently, according to IMDb, the only reason Sandra Bullock did this film and agreed to do this film was so she could finance the movie Hope Floats. So to get Hope Floats to work, she had to do this. Sometimes you got to accept the shawarma. But let's talk about who's in this film here. The movie stars Sandra Bullock, Jason Patrick, Willem Dafoe, Tamura Morrison, Brian McCarty, Jeremy Hotz, Bo Svensson, Royale Watkins, Christine Firkins, and a bunch of stowaways. However, there is an almost starring in this one. As Geiger, as played by Willem Dafoe, apparently Gary Oldman was considered for the role and offered it, but he turned it down so he could go to Air Force One, which just goes to show that Gary Oldman makes smart choices.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think Gary Oldman would have been able to fit to that anyway. I think, what we got with Willem Dafoe, which I'm sure we'll get onto, I think Willem Dafoe's he can play the tone of a film, and I think Gary Oldman would have probably overacted in a different way, I suppose.
And that's the thing. Like there are some actors who they sell like the overacting, and it becomes almost fun. The first person that comes to mind is Richard E. Grant. Like Richard E. Grant would have been wonderful and delicious in this film as well. But I think you're right. I think Gary Oldman is, I hate to say it, too good for Speed 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd agree with that, definitely.
Now, obviously, Keanu Reeves declined to do the sequel. Apparently, he read the script and said, "Yeah, no, I'm going to go do the Devil's Advocate." So, there's that. But under consideration for the male lead, of course, the character of Alex is played by Jason Patrick. I'm going to run these names by you here, and let's see if you think they would have paired well with Sandra Bullock given this script. Okay, Patrick Muldoon.
Yeah, you see, I sort of looked this up, and I don't know who Patrick Muldoon is.
Okay, so I'm not the only one. Okay, perfect. Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah. Okay. No, well, I don't actually. Yeah, I think he paired pretty well with Sandra Bullock in A Time to Kill, so I can see that chemistry. It certainly have had more chemistry than Jason Patrick, so I could have seen that. Yeah, definitely.
See, here's the thing: when I see Matthew McConaughey's name there, and the first thing that comes to mind, as far as putting him in a potential Speed 2 movie, is I flash back to the movie Sahara, where you play Dirk Pitt, the character from the Clive Cussler novel, and in hindsight, I kind of like him in that role, and I think he can play that action adventure star fairly well. Like Sahara is another one of those films that I'm going to have to talk about because I think I've talked about it a few times on this show because I'm a big Clive Cussler fan. I've read so many of his books. I love the Dirk Pitt series, and then Sahara came out, and I stopped reading the Clive Cussler novels. It happens. It happens. But in hindsight, he actually wasn't a bad Dirk Pitt. There are so many other bad castings in that, but he's not a bad Dirk Pitt, and I think he could have carried that. I don't know. Have you seen Sahara?
I haven't. No.
Okay, so before I recommend it, I'm going to say, have you read Clive Cussler's books?
Also, no.
Okay, so you'll enjoy Sahara then. This is good.
Okay.
Christian Slater.
Yeah, I could see Christian Slater. I think he'd probably fit the tone of the film quite well. Whether he'd have had the chemistry with Sandra Bullock is another question. I think he's a very one-dimensional actor, and that probably sounds quite unfair. And I don't think I wouldn't say he's a bad actor, but I don't think he's got a great deal of range.
See, I'm going to argue that a little bit, and I say that because he did a movie called He Was a Quiet Man, and he's so not your typical Christian Slater role for him in that, and it's a hard movie to watch. I'll give it that, and until you get to the end and you see the really bad CGI. But that being said, he plays a role that's very different from him, and it's definitely a movie worth watching. The movie's called He Was a Quiet Man, but I do understand, like, there is a Christian Slater type, and if you had said to me Christian Slater was under consideration for the role of Geiger, I would have totally believed that.
Yeah, I could see that.
And finally, and I can't believe I'm saying this, John Bon Jovi.
Just no. If there's any way to make this film worse, it would have been John Bon Jovi, for sure.
Now, are you saying that because you're not a fan of Bon Jovi's music? Are you saying that because you don't think he fit the role? Or are you saying that because you've seen Moonlight and Valentino?
I'm saying that because it's John Bon Jovi. Nothing more than that. I think it would have just made it. I'm trying to think what I've seen him acting in. I have seen him in something. I can't remember for the life of me what it is. But yeah, no.
I mean, here's the thing. Like, when he appeared on 30 Rock as himself, I mean, that was kind of like self-deprecating humor, so that's kind of fun. The first time I remember seeing him in a film was for about 3 seconds when he was one of the villains in, or at least one of the prisoners getting out of the cage in Young Guns 2, only to get shot. And probably still, to this day, John Bon Jovi's best acting gig. 3 seconds, get shot. The movie is directed by Jan de Bont, and of course he directed the first one. Although I'm sure he doesn't really advertise that, because at the Razzies that year, this was nominated 8 times. So let's go through this list here. At the 18th Annual Razzie Awards, it was nominated for Worst Picture. It lost to The Postman. Sandra Bullock was nominated for Worst Actress. She lost to Demi Moore in G.I. Jane. Willem Dafoe was nominated for Worst Supporting Actor. He lost to Dennis Rodman in Double Team. And the fact that Dennis Rodman is on this list makes me wonder how he didn't win every award, because it's Dennis Rodman. Sandra Bullock and Jason Patric were nominated for Worst Screen Couple. They lost to Dennis Rodman and Jean-Claude Van Damme in Double Team. The movie was also nominated for Worst Director for Jan de Bont. They lost to Kevin Costner for The Postman. The movie was nominated for Worst Screenplay. Lost to The Postman. It was also nominated for Worst Original Song for the song My Dream as performed by Shaggy. They lost to the entire song score from The Postman. So
thank God for The Postman.
I was about to say, which is funny too. And again, I have to go back and actually read the book, because the book is written by David Brin. And David Brin, if you're a sci-fi author, David Brin is a wonderful, wonderful author. When they were looking to continue the Foundation series, as originally written by Isaac Asimov, they picked 3 authors to write one book each to continue the Foundation series. Of course, Foundation is now a series on Apple TV. But they had picked Greg Benford, Greg Bear, and David Brin. So the fact that he's at that level where they're saying, yeah, you're allowed to continue Asimov's works, that's saying a lot. Now, that's 7 nominations. I said 8. That's because they won for worst remake or sequel. Here are the movies that this movie beat: Batman and Robin, Home Alone 3, The Lost World Jurassic Park, and McHale's Navy. Now, I'm not saying it deserved to win, but it might have deserved to win given that kind of company.
I don't know. I mean, the standout from that list is obviously Batman and Robin, which is, I know I'm a big DC fan, and no, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, I suppose Batman and Robin's it's made very tongue in cheek, I suppose. So that's probably edges it towards being a little bit self-deprecating, but
it feels a little meta at times. It feels like it's not only tipping its hat, but it's tipping the entire cowl and cape as well to the Adam West era. However,
yeah, absolutely,
that was the Razzies. We're not done with the accolades here, because at the 1997 Stinkers, the film was given a dishonorable mention. The worst film at the Stinkers that year was Batman and Robin. Jan de Bont was nominated for Worst Director. He lost to Joel Schumacher for Batman and Robin. It was also nominated for Worst Screenplay for a film grossing over $100 million using Hollywood math, and yes, that's the actual name of the award, lost to Batman and Robin. I'm seeing a theme here with the Stinkers. However, it won for Worst Sequel. It beat Batman and Robin, The Lost World, Alien Resurrection, and An American Werewolf in Paris.
Wow. That seems very unfair. The Lost World seems very unfair to be nominated for worst anything. Certainly worst sequel.
You know what? I'm going to say something that actually kind of leads into something I was going to save till the end of the show, but I'm going to say it now anyways, because you kind of led into it. So that leads me to believe that you saw my notes. The Lost World was always destined to fail, because the original Jurassic Park was so amazing. The thing with Speed 2 is that it was always destined to fail, because Speed was one of those sleeper hits that became like just iconic in the fact that it's freaking Keanu Reeves, but the sequel lacked so much from what made the original good. And when you have something that is beloved, and Speed is a beloved film, you're climbing uphill before you even roll the camera. Yeah,
and I mean, this is probably going to be my biggest argument for being a slight proponent for this film, certainly more than the 4% that it got on Rotten Tomatoes, and is that this is a terrible sequel to Speed. Absolutely, I will agree with that. Had this not been a sequel to Speed and just a film on its own, I don't think it would have been as maligned as it is.
See, I feel like you just speed ran to the end where all my notes were hiding, because yes, clearly you've hacked my system here. However, despite all those awards, it wasn't all bad at the box office, even though it's going to seem that way at first. The film had a budget, according to IMDb, of $160 million. Domestically, it only made $48 million, and worldwide made $164.5 million. However, when it debuted on the June 13th, 1997 weekend, it debuted at number 1 with $16.1 million, narrowly beating out Con Air. Now, it did get knocked out of number 1 the following week by The Lost World. But At $16 million, Speed 2 made more in its first week than the original Speed did by about $2 million. So it started good and then went downhill because that's when the critics got their hands on it. Over at Metacritic, this film has a Metascore of 23, and you mentioned it, over at Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score sits at 16%, but the tomatometer is at a very, 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 very low 4%. And I want to put this into perspective here, because when we usually talk about Sandra Bullock, we're gushing because she is an absolute gem. This film, of movies that have an official tomatometer, this film is the lowest of her career at 4%. However, when it comes to audience score, it's not. Of movies that have an actual audience score, tomato score on Rotten Tomatoes, Hangman was sitting at 5%. Who Shot Pat was sitting at 9%. And Fire on the Amazon was sitting at 14%. So it's not as bad as Fire on the Amazon, apparently.
Okay. I've not seen any of those films. To be fair.
No. I mean, Fire on the Amazon is one of those films where it's like, people know it, I think, pretty much for one reason and one reason alone. Well, okay, two reasons, and you can probably guess what those two reasons are. The left and the right. But that's all I'm going to say about that one. I have never seen Fire on the Amazon, so I can't really justify, or at least comment on the film. But I'm sure it's one of those films where Sandra Bullock goes, and this is how we start the career. But let's get into the breakdown of this film here. And we have to start, of course, with Sandra Bullock, who plays Annie. We're returning from the original, and one of the very few people to actually return from the original. There were a few smaller characters, but she's the main one here. So how is Annie in cruise control for you? Well,
I mean, obviously the film really depends on her, and, especially with the absence of Keanu Reeves. And she's the only real, like you say, link to the first film, apart from a couple of bit parts. And Sandra Bullock was really on an upward trajectory at this point. She'd done the first Speed, she'd done The Net, I think, by this point, and Time to Kill, and she was very much becoming a bankable actress. But I don't think she was bankable enough for it to make an impact on this film. And she's definitely quite infectious in this film now. I think she's still quite charming, and she does the best with what she's got, I suppose. That there's a lot of misplaced humor in this film, but there are some parts of her character that add to that humor a slight amount. But she's really sort of struggling uphill with the script and the plot of the film. But for me, she is one of the better parts of the film, I think.
I am a little disappointed in you, sir. Because in all the movies that you listed leading up to this film, you, sir, have failed to mention Demolition Man.
Yeah, but that was after Speed, so she wasn't on that.
It was after. Well, no, it was 1993. Mm-hmm. So
Speed was 94. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, still on the up and up. But any chance I get to talk about Demolition Man, I'm going to take it. So maybe I'm just trying to squeeze that in there. But regardless of, Demolition Man is a gem. Anyways, but getting back to Sandra Bullock, and I think the thing about the first movie with her is that Annie is a very realistic character in the first Speed, who's stuck in an incredible situation and has to overcome her own fears in order to be able to sit down and drive the bus, right? While Keanu Reeves has to do his best to save the day, but she's not helpless in that film.
Yeah,
she's actually doing something. She's part of the solution. And I think the problem with this one is that Annie feels like she didn't need to be there. With everything that was going on, Annie is a good character because she rises to the occasion, because she meets the moment, and because despite the insanity that's going on, she's somehow going to do her part, and the solution can't be solved without her.
Mm-hmm.
She may as well just stayed in the cabin at this point.
Yeah.
Had a few martinis, just chilled out for the 2 hours there and let Jason Patrick run around. And I think that's a discredit to what Sandra Bullock had built in the first film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. She is little more than, sort of folly for the villain in the last half of the film. And, it's just the build up is more about Annie, because she's the only connection to the first film. So that first half of the film is reacquainting yourself with her character and her new boyfriend and everything else, and that works quite well. And then once there's the evacuation of the ship and everything else, she's pretty much doing nothing.
Yeah, and I think the problem too is that the script felt like it was written for somebody else. Like, they forgot what Sandra Bullock brought to the table in the first time. They forgot who Annie was. And it's written for lack of a better term, a damsel in distress, as opposed to someone who has already proven herself in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
Jason Patrick, who played Alex, I have thoughts. I have many, many thoughts, none of them good. But how is he for you?
Well, I mean, Jason Patrick is one of those actors, and I think he's, with all due respect, I don't think he's ever really found his feet as an actor. He's never sort of settled into a particular genre. He's not great as a romantic lead in this, certainly, or even as an action lead. I don't think he's not got the charm that Keanu Reeves has, and he's got very little chemistry with Sandra Bullock, and there's just no charisma there. He's very wooden. He's very straight, and I think that's what really sort of lacks. If you'd have had another actor in this role, and I think in retrospect, Matthew McConaughey probably would have been a really good choice for having that chemistry. If you'd had that bit more chemistry, I think the role of Alex Shaw would have worked a hell of a lot better.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. Like, Jason Patrick is driving at one speed, and I'm sorry, I'm going to make really, really bad driving puns and probably a few boat puns here and there, but dad jokes and bad jokes for days over here. But the thing with it you're right. There's no charisma. There's no dynamic to his performance. The thing with Keanu Reeves in the first one, again, you have a cop who is, again, trying to rise to meet the moment, but there's moments during the whole thing where he's lost and he doesn't know what to do next. And he's feeling overwhelmed and outthought and outmaneuvered by Dennis Hopper. Like, Keanu Reeves felt real in Speed, despite being an action hero, but it wasn't an action. Jason Patrick went full action hero in this, and complete with movable parts and non-movable face. Like, there was zero expression in this. He was legitimately a G.I. Joe action figure, Caribbean style.
Absolutely, yeah. He's totally just one-dimensional. This character, and just in case we move straight on from Jason Patrick, because it's very easy to do. I just wanted to point out something that's quite criminal, to be fair, I think, is that there was a massive missed opportunity that they never made a live-action Captain Scarlet and cast Jason Patrick in the lead, because he looks just like Captain Scarlet.
You're going to have to refresh my memory, and maybe this is an across the pond thing, but Captain Scarlet?
It may be. It was the follow-up series to Thunderbirds. But if you Google Captain Scarlet, it looks just like Jason Patrick, and he's probably slightly less wooden.
I was going to make a wooden joke if you didn't, but you did, so we're good there. Now, Thunderbirds I get. Thunderbirds I completely get. So if that's in that kind of same realm, okay, cool. We get that now, and yes, absolutely. Willem Dafoe as Geiger. Like, if this character is a buffet, Dafoe came to eat. But how was he for you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want somebody to effectively replace Dennis Hopper, the closest you're going to get, I think, in the 90s is Willem Dafoe. It's not perfect. It's not stellar performance, mainly due to the script, which I'm sure we'll probably keep going back to. But I don't think Willem Dafoe's ever really sort of pulled out a dud performance, and he's just chewing on the scenery like he always does, and to great effect as well. I think he struggles. I think where he struggles, where Dennis Hopper sort of excelled, and again, this is down to the script, is that Dennis Hopper was able to have that sort of 1-2 with the Keanu Reeves character, and they were able to communicate, and he was able to play off that. Willem Dafoe's having to do a lot of acting by himself. There's not much of the film where he's conversing with the antagonists or anything like that in the film. He's really acting with himself and some leeches at times as well. So he doesn't get the opportunity to go to the lengths that Dennis Hopper does in the first film, which I think is a massive shame.
I'm actually about to start saying nice things about this film here. So, bear with me here on this one. So first, let's take a look at the role of Geiger. When it comes to villains, there's got to be more of a motivation than just, oh, hey, there's money and diamonds on the boat, I'm going to steal them. His entire motivation for specifically targeting a cruise liner, because his company designed all the automation systems, and then when he got sick, he also got fired, and that kind of shunning for corporate reasons, and obviously, you're sick, you're no good to us. Like, there's a perfectly valid reason for Geiger to want to seek revenge, and it's nothing personal against the people on the boat. And it's nothing really personal against the people driving the boat, because they're employees just like he was. But he's doing what he can to exact revenge on the company itself, regardless of who gets hurt. And he's trying to do it in the biggest way possible. It just so happens that there's diamonds there as well. So, hey, why not, right? But it's never really about the payday. It's more about the revenge. So in that sense, I think Geiger was at least built as a decent villain with motivation. The other thing, too, with Willem Dafoe is that he probably took a look at the script and said, oh, hey, it's a popcorn flick. I'm going to play it like a popcorn villain. It's almost like he understood the assignment and everyone else didn't. And it's similar to, I think, why The Mummy works so well as a film, because they looked at it and said, this is a classic big screen popcorn flick that is larger than life. So we don't need subtlety. We don't need nuance. Nuance is not made for Speed 2. So if that's the case, then Willem Dafoe definitely injected some adrenaline into the film.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I think he's a very capable actor, and like I said at the start, I think he understands the tone of projects. Something I saw him in quite recently, which I watched because I'd heard that it's very much lauded by audiences and very much a cult film, was the Boondock Saints, which I did not enjoy an ounce, other than Willem Dafoe's performance. And again, that comes down to him understanding the tone of the film.
See, it's funny because you're one of the few people I've ever talked to that has said they did not enjoy the Boondock Saints. And it qualifies. The audience score is fairly high on that film, but the tomatometer is in the 20s. And that's the difference in, the two scores always fascinates me, because someone got it and someone didn't. It's usually the critics who didn't. But for you to tell me that you didn't like the Boondock Saints, that makes me sit there and go, maybe I need to go back and rewatch it, but I still liked it. Not necessarily for, the two main characters, although loves me some Billy Connolly in this. But you're right, Willem Dafoe is definitely the stage character as opposed to the screen character.
Yes, definitely.
But sometimes
and I would like to point out as well that he has a power glove in this film.
Oh my God. Like there is nothing more 90s than a power glove, but the thing is though, his character, it makes sense, right? He's a computer genius. He developed the systems. He knows how to hack the systems. Let's be honest, his little golf club, arsenal, completely brilliant. And it's always great when you're watching action film and they have those sneaky little gadgets that they can pull out and set all over the place. But even so, he's not there to destroy the boat. It's simple to just blow up a boat. He wants to make a point. He wants to make a statement. And Geiger makes sense in that. And it's one of the few actors who does.
But then I think again, going back to what I said earlier on about this would have been a better film if it wasn't a speed sequel, because we're going very much into the same trajectory as the first film, in that Dennis Hopper's character feels that he's been unfairly maligned by the police, and he's not been given the retirement fund or whatever it was, or he was gotten rid of because he was disabled, because he'd lost his fingers and things like that. This is almost exactly the same MO as the villain in the first film. So immediately you sort of think they're just completely rehashing the same thing. And then for our main character of Annie to be involved with somebody who has got exactly the same MO, it then becomes unrealistic.
I mean, obviously, you take a look at the Die Hard movies, right? And the same criticism could be thrown at Die Hard too, right? Oh, hey, John McClane is waiting for his wife at Christmas and terrorists happen to attack. And this time it's in an airport instead of Nakatomi Plaza. Like, yes, you're going to.
But then they were sort of drug lords, and there was a drug, that they were busting out a big, General Esperanza, who's a big drug lord, and various different other things. So it's different enough. It's different enough from the first one.
Mm-hmm. But I also think too, that's also why I think I preferred Die Hard 3, so Die Hard with a Vengeance, over Die Hard 2, because it was much more different and it felt more like a cat and mouse psychological game, as opposed to, John McClane's going to stop the terrorists in, X building. Yeah. So, I wonder too now what would Speed 3 be like, and if that's the case. So very interesting. Tamura Morrison, of course, most people will recognize him as Boba Fett, as Giuliano, the first mate who becomes the de facto captain. Shout out to Tamura Morrison, who apparently doesn't age, because this movie came out in 97 and he still looks the damn same today. Apparently it's all the back to tanks here, but how was he for you?
Well, I mean, he was on quite a different sort of trajectory to Sandra Bullock at this time, really. He's come off a film I saw quite recently, which was 1994's Once Were Warriors from New Zealand, which is a fantastic film, and I can thoroughly recommend it to absolutely everybody. Anyone who hasn't seen it, it is brilliant. But then he goes from that to Barbed Wire, from that to The Island of Dr. Moreau, and then he goes to this. I mean, I'd argue that he's a little bit miscast. I think he's better as a sort of moody, sort of, hard ass. I don't think he's the right man to play somebody who's effectively sort of becomes quite incompetent throughout the film. And I think it would have helped the film if he wasn't quite so bumbling through a lot of the film. He's not really a big help to to Jason Patrick's character for the most part, and he seems very much out of his depth, which I don't think suits his acting style.
I'm going to put a counter on that, and I think it's mainly because of what we just talked about with Geiger. So Geiger built these computer systems for this cruise line, so it was very much, sit back and enjoy your cappuccino or your tea or whatever the heck you're drinking, and the boat pretty much sails itself. So by Tamira Morrison, by Giuliano being a tad ineffectual when things start to go wrong, it makes sense because Geiger designed the system to do the work for them. So they're not as familiar with how to actually get themselves out of a jam, which again leads into Geiger's resentment. They let go of me because I got sick, and these people can't even drive a damn boat by themselves. What the heck, guys? Like, what the hell did I design this for? Did I design it for you to become incompetent? So you can almost see that through Giuliano's, and the same goes for Merced as well, through their, seeming inability to overcome the challenges caused by all of this. It almost justifies Geiger's disdain for them.
Yeah, I can see that. That's a fair point, I suppose. Yeah.
I can't believe I just defended Speed 2. Okay. But the thing is, in that sense, the fact that he is the first mate, he's not the captain, he's just the first mate, right? Who happens to take over once Bo Svensson goes swimming. He's not supposed to be in charge. He's not supposed to be the one fighting off some invasion, terrorist attack, which is probably what it feels like at that point. Like everything is going wrong with the boat. He's not trained for that because the boat's not supposed to do that. So kind of makes sense, but there's something about his charm that I think I liked Giuliano in this.
Okay, I'll give you that.
But I mentioned Merced is played by Brian McCarty, another one who's just trying to keep the ship going. I have thoughts, and he was fine until one point, but I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Well, I think Brian McCarty's quite a fascinating actor. He's got this very sort of quite peculiar, crisp sort of Scottish accent, and it's quite sort of over enunciated, and it's just quite unusual for a Scottish accent. But I think it works quite well. He's very much the sort of naysayer on the crew side of things, and he's pointing out the craziness and the impracticality of things and the danger of the tasks at hand. And I think this is where we start to get into the sort of the cast and the characters, where we've got a lot going on with various different sort of people, parts of the crew and things like that. And he gets a little bit sort of lost in the shuffle. I mean, I think he's quite a capable actor. I mean, I knew him sort of before this from another film I think I put to you for this podcast was The Ghost in the Darkness, which he's quite effective in. And then later on, he was in a BBC series over here called Line of Duty, where he played an absolute bastard, but really well. And sort of here, he's I don't know, he's just sort of in the middle of, whether you should be sympathetic to him or you should be annoyed with him or what. His character's sort of all over the place.
I think he was doing fine until they were, about to crash into the, into the little beach town, and he's counting down the speed. So it's like reverse speed at this point. But the thing,
like it matters, yeah.
But the thing is, he's staring pretty much right down the barrel of the lens, counting down the speed in knots. And it looks like he's getting whipped to death in order to do it, because I get, right, you gotta move around like the boat's getting rocked and all that, but it literally looks like he's like 11 knots. Please, sir, can I have another? I'm like, oh, come on. and then they crash like 0, See, and I get it's the script. I do. I really do appreciate it's the script. But if the director was hurting Brian McCarty while he was counting down the speed, please stop hurting Brian McCarty. It just it became almost memeable at that point. And because they kept going back to it, it's like, you clearly thought this was a good idea, Jane DeBond.
Yeah, it's totally unrequired at that point. It just it really does sort of slow the pace of the film down. That we all we need to see is the destruction that it's making on this little beach town, and we don't need to know how much it's slowing down. It's slowing down the boat. We just need to know how close it's getting to the little doggy and the little kid in the apartment.
Yeah, no, it's
all we need to know.
Yeah, you can show him pointing out that the speed is going down every time they crash into something, and that, we need more things to crash into. Like that would have been a funny thing, and all you need to do is do it once. Just do it once. Stop whipping the poor boy. Jeremy Hotz as Ashton, the concierge, supposedly, I guess, the comic relief.
Yeah, well, he's quite a sort of archetypal, sort of slimy, ungracious sort of a loser, I suppose. He's that you'd expect from this kind of film, and he does sort of pull it off. You believe that he's that kind of person that would fish for tips and gratuities at the on the cruise. But he does ask at one point, why is everybody trying to kill me? And I think the answer is because everybody thinks that you're Rob Schneider.
Yes, this is very much the Rob Schneider role, isn't it? I never really pictured it until now. You've just ruined a Jeremy Hotz performance. Not that it was any good to begin with. And again, it's one of those things where I get that you need to have some of those characters who are going to occasionally quip and just tell you exactly how bad things are by occasionally shouting out, "We're all going to die." But you whack him over the head and toss him in the closet, and that was probably the best move because the character was not that good.
Well, this comes to it. This really brings up a big point for this film in the fact that it was a PG film, and that was a choice by Jan de Bont. He wanted it to be more accessible to a wider audience. So obviously, a difference to the original Speed. There's no swearing. There's quite a distinct lack of violence, and there's really only, excluding the main villain, there's only really a couple of deaths in this film, and they're not very graphic. And really, the Ashton character, it could have probably died and sort of raised the stakes a little bit in this film.
Yeah, no, it's just whack him over the head. Like any regular villain would have just killed him, just outright. But I think that also maybe, just maybe, flushes out Geiger a bit more, because Geiger's not a killer. He's not. He's just trying to make a point by crashing the boat, because he gave them the opportunity to get off the boat. He's like, you have 15 minutes, evacuate. And someone who's trying to just be an out homicidal maniac isn't going to give them that opportunity. He's just going to crash the boat and not give them any warning.
But then he's got no problem sending the captain to a watery grave.
Which I'm so glad you brought him up. Bo Svensson, playing Captain Pollard. I'm sorry. If there's a maniac swinging a bar at you, and the bar is only so long, and it is attached to the railing, take 2 steps back and you get to live.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is preceded by the fact that is it 4 degrees off course, which seems like a fair bit to me. I mean, I'm no maritime expert, but that seems quite a lot to where they're going. And he just completely ignores it because he wants to dress up and go for dinner.
Well, captain's prerogative, right?
Mm.
I mean, you walk towards the maniac, you're going overboard. You should have seen the signs. It's almost like they made him so stupid in order to make way for Giuliano and for Maquette to be in that situation. It's like, yeah, we need to get rid of the captain. It's like the beginning of Star Wars Episode 9. The Emperor somehow lives. What? Royale Watkins, who played Dante the photographer, and you kind of have to have that quippy character to kind of help out in certain situations whenever they come up. I actually kind of liked him in this.
Yeah, I mean, he was fine. There's nothing really sort of bad about his performance or anything like that. I think, again, it falls to the script. He's one of many sort of sidekicks of the film, really, for Jason Patric, along with Tamara Morrison and Brian McCarty. It just sort of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, I suppose. But his performance is fine. He's quite charming, quite charismatic as well. Nothing really bad to say about him. He does sort of help out and gets the plot moving along, and he helps to steer the ship away from the container, the oil container as well. So he's a reasonably integral part of them surviving as well.
It kind of feels to me, and again, this is nothing against Royale Watkins at all. Again, this is script and development. It's almost like they took the character of, and I can't remember the character's name in Die Hard, the guy who was the limo driver and waiting in the underground garage while John McClane goes to get his girl, kind of thing. Argyle, yes, that's it. Thank you. He's Argyle. Dante is Argyle. Yeah. That's pretty much it.
Well, this was actually tossed around as a script for a Die Hard film, wasn't it? At one point,
there's a myth that it is, but yes,
a myth. Sorry, yes, yeah.
But you can very much see the parallels.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely,
yeah.
One of the things that Speed did very well is that you only had X number of people on the bus, and those characters and the shared peril gave weight to the situation. There were a lot of passengers on this ship that I couldn't give two craps about, and I didn't even write down any of their names except for one. And that's Christine Firkins, who played Drew, the deaf girl.
Okay.
I liked her in this, but there's more that needed to be done, but I was just curious. Christine Firkins, and by the way, this is her only ever film role.
Mm-hmm.
She appeared, I think, in like 2 episodes of The X-Files after this, but that was it. This is her only movie.
Yeah, you see, I was going to mention that. I was going to go very movie jewel on you and point out the X-Files connection of this of this film, of which there's quite a few, to be fair. But yeah, I think it works quite well. But it's just, again, it's sort of lost in the shuffle. It's not really sort of expanded fantastically well. But for a person, an actress who is, legitimately deaf in real life, I think she performs really well.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to sort of convey emotion and fear without vocalizing, she does really well. I wouldn't necessarily agree with you though that there's not much to mention in the passengers of this film.
I mean, again, this is just the rest of the passengers didn't do anything for me. But the thing with Drew, okay, first of all, kudos to the production for hiring an actual deaf person to play a deaf character. And I know, there are deaf characters that are played by non-deaf people, and you can kind of see through it. Here, yes, just positive, affirmative casting. Boom. Yes, you got a deaf person playing a deaf person. Great. All good. But Drew is the character that should have been the redemption for Alex.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily the redemption, but the redemption of Alex in Annie's eyes. Because there's this whole thing when they're at the dinner and, he sees that Drew is kind of mopey because her parents are down on her, kind of thing. He, from across the room, he's trying to, pick up her spirits and whatnot. And of course he does rescue her. And this is after, the whole thing of like, sure, maybe kids, but it depends on who's asking, kind of thing. And, this is when Annie's not sure of Alex's marrying material. Mm-hmm. But rescuing Drew and the connection between what feels like the only kid on the cruise ship.
Yeah.
That should have been the development that allowed Annie to see the good in Alex, not just the I'm going to save the everybody. It's what he does for this one girl. But it's like he saves her and then we barely see her. Yeah.
No. Yeah. She should have, that should have been, if anything, she should have been the person that Geiger took off with the, on the jet ski and then it's left to sort of Annie and Alex, I suppose, to try and rescue her. That would have been probably a better development in the script and the plot.
I mean, think about it. Annie and Geiger are on that like dual Sea-Doo kind of thing, which super cool. But imagine if Geiger's on just a regular Sea-Doo and the two of them, like Alex hops onto the dual thing because it's the only thing left. And, he explains, no, I'm saving that girl up. She's going to her parents. And then Annie jumps on and says, well, you're not doing it by yourself kind of thing. And they go out on the dual Sea-Doo. And then oh my God, we're writing a better Speed 2 movie as we're talking about this. A much better climax than this. But the thing is, like, Drew could have made Alex a better person in Annie's eyes if you allowed it to happen. You had the pieces there and you were setting it up so perfectly, and then you devolved into Brian McCarty being whipped while he's counting down speed knots.
You're obsessed with Brian McCarty being whipped.
Apparently so.
This is just an interesting look into your psyche,
You're the one who brought this movie, I'm telling you.
Nothing in my notes about Brian McCarty being whipped.
Clearly, you forgot to go to page 4. Okay. I do want to make one shout out here before I'll give you the space here to talk about anyone else on the boat. Tim Conway as the driving instructor. First of all, I freaking love Tim Conway. I still have on VHS a copy of Dorf on Golf. And if you've never seen Dorf on Golf, you are missing something. The Dorf character is so much fun. Oh my God.
Dorf on Golf.
Oh my God. You got to find it. You have to find Dorf on Golf. And it's completely horrible fun in all the worst possible ways. But anytime Tim Conway's on, like he's a comic gem. He absolutely is. And to bookend it with Tim Conway as the driving instructor, I think was actually, quite smart and quite fun. Mm-hmm. But getting back to the rest of the people on the boat, was there anyone else that stood out for you?
Well, just before we get onto that, I would like to say that Tim Conway is one of the other X-Files connections as well. He was in a brilliant episode called Je Souhaite, which was about Jeannie in season 7, I think. Anyone who's not seen that, go and watch it. It's great. But yeah, I mean, I would point towards Michael G. Haggerty, who plays Harvey. And I think, he's not really fleshed out in this film, but I think he's a great comic actor. He was in Friends quite a bit in the early series, and one of my personal favourites, Overboard, with Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn. But I think he brings a little bit of humour to the film, and just a great line of where Alex is banging on the door and saying, "Are there any little girls in there?" And he says, "There's no little girls, just some big women," for which he gets scolded. Colin Camp, who plays his wife in this as well. I've got a massive soft spot for Colin Camp, mainly because she was in Clue and played Yvette, the maid. If you didn't mention it, I was going to. Yes, absolutely. Yvette as Clue. Yvette in Clue. Well, Clue is just a perfect movie. Clue is absolutely a perfect movie. Great. But the thing is, there was so little development of those characters. Yeah. Oh, like, they're there for a couple of quips, and that's about it. And I think that's where Speed obviously is the superior film. And it's because of the shared peril, and you felt for them.
You absolutely did. And, aside from the occasional quips here and there, and aside from Drew, you didn't really care about the passengers in this.
No. I know what you mean. I think there is, and that is a major flaw in the script, is that there's too much going on. You sort of built up to, they sort of build these characters up through the first half of the film where, Alex and Annie are meeting them and sort of, in their sort of presence, but they're not necessarily interacting with them. So it does get a little bit, the runtime of this film was 2 hours, and you probably could have cut at least 15-20 minutes off that with some of the unneeded development of some of the other passengers on the film. There's a couple of sisters on this on the cruise as well that were really superfluous to the plot, other than maybe the big women joke. And there's a singer and her partner as well, I think it is, that's not necessarily needed.
Yeah.
But before we move on and finish that, I would just like to, I would be remiss as a gentleman of the UK to not mention that this film has an epic cameo by UB40.
I did see that. And then I heard the song and I couldn't get the song out of my head. So.
And I am extremely concerned because I don't know what happened to UB40 in this film. Did they get off?
I'm assuming that they were evacuated because women, children, and UB40 first. Okay, that's just the general rule of all cruise ships. Women, children, and UB40 first.
Yeah,
this is a big budget action film. $160 million. It's a big budget action film in 1997. I say that because they could have done so much better with the plane crashing into the tower of the oil tanker. It was so badly done that I laughed out loud when Willem Dafoe crashed the plane and got stuck on the mast.
Yeah.
Oh, like really?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense that he would land on the mast and that would cause the explosion of an oil tanker. But
here's the thing. At the speed he was going, there's no way he's getting stuck up there like someone's playing sticky darts. And even if he does, there's no way he's in one piece to be able to start laughing maniacally.
No.
So it's anytime I think of a film that just needs an end, I always flash back to The Stand, the made-for-TV 4-part movie where it's all of a sudden you got Max Headroom riding a bomb into Las Vegas and the hand of God, points down and explodes it. This was Stephen King needing to end the book at that point. And literally Willem Dafoe crashing his plane into a mast and getting it stuck like someone tossed a, paper airplane into a chain link fence. That's literally how it felt. Toss the paper airplane to get stuck on a bush.
I get that. I think the only thing that saves the finale of this film, and I understand that those points that you've made about the plane on the mast and everything else, but the only thing that saves the finale of this film is the inclusion of the Glenn Plummer character from the first film.
Yes. But again, that's one of those smart callbacks to the original.
Yes.
And if there was a bit more of that, it's that almost felt like one of the first drafts where it's like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. Keep that. Don't touch it. It's all good. Right.
Yeah.
The same thing with, the very end, her trying to get her driver's license again. And they got cut off by a bus going too fast. That's funny. It's funny. As an end credit scene, it's funny. It's great. But you mentioned it earlier in that if you took Speed 2 out of the title and it wasn't Annie, but it was some other actress and some other different character. So there's no connection to the first Speed whatsoever. It's just a boat.
Mm-hmm.
You can still call it Cruise Control too, despite how corny that title is. But it feels like a spec script, and they shoehorn it in. And I always go back to American Psycho 2, where it's like you did not need to make it an American Psycho film. You had a script, a decent script. Don't tie it to something else, because then you put the weight of expectation on it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, you could probably say, take Speed out of the title. It's quite a cookie cutter 90s action film, but I think it would have been an average 90s cookie cutter action film, and not a 4% on Rotten Tomatoes 90s action film
with a $160 million budget.
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of feels like an asylum film at times.
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I think, when you look at the effects of this film, I think they almost sort of stand up. There's a few bits sort of underneath when they're trying to sort of plug the propellers and things like that can look a little bit shaky, but not bad for 1997 compared to, something that we've discussed in the past, which was The Relic, which the CGI looks a lot clunkier in that than it does this.
Mm-hmm.
But you think of the cruise liner crashing into the harbour at the end of this film is a practical effect. It's not a CGI effect. There's a few sort of CGI effects with the cruise liner, but a lot of the budget went on creating 3 different versions of the ship, and a lot of those sort of effects and those set pieces of the film, I think, stand up pretty well.
I mean, aside from Willem Dafoe's perfect plane landing, but maybe it's the script, because the script feels a little asylum.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Before we get to our MVPs, you mentioned that it's not a 4% film, and I do agree. Despite how bad I've been ripping on this film, it's not a 4% film, because it is decent action. Your villain has believable motives, even if it's questionable airplane landing skills. You have characters that you can feel for, and you can understand the motivations and why some of those characters are the way they are. So if you're putting a score to this out of 100%, what are you putting Speed 2 at?
For me, this is at least, being generous, I would say that this is 30-40%. I would say that's being that's being generous. I think, as far as the 4% goes, I think, if I was rating this as, no nostalgia, because it was at least one of the first films I saw in cinema, and I enjoyed that at the time. I must admit, watching it this time around, that the nostalgia effect had worn off quite a bit. But I think realistically, this is sort of 15-20%.
Yeah, I mean, I think the audience got it right. I'd put it around 25 personally, because I do think there are redeemable factors of this, so long as you get rid of Speed 2. If you just take it as a regular action flick and forget that the first Speed movie exists, I think you're right. I think it does fare so much better. But now it's come time. So, Peter, who is your MVP of Speed 2?
Well, I'm going to have to be quite obvious on this, I think, and it is Christine Ferkins is a very, very, very close second. But for me, it is Willem Dafoe. Because I just love Willem Dafoe. And, if you can see any light in this, in the tunnel that is Speed 2 Cruise Control, it is the John Geiger character and the way that Willem Dafoe plays him. Just, 100% right tone. And, you get a maniacal laugh when he's about to die. It's classic Willem Dafoe.
This is going to sound really, really familiar here. But Christine Ferkins is a very close second, but I'm going to go with Willem Dafoe. Again, you stole my notes. You clearly hacked my system here. It would have been Christine Ferkins. No, don't apologize. It would have been Christine Ferkins, definitely, had they allowed Drew's ability to make Alex seem marryable to Annie and continued on with what they had in the first half. They had it. And they fumbled the ball and turned it into just typical action schlock. Christine Ferkins was really, really good in this. I wish she had continued on as an actress, but completely get that, when someone wants to walk away, let him walk away. It's all good. But for her one and done, Christine Ferkins was really good. But no, it's Willem Dafoe because Geiger was a good character and because he understood the assignment. Peter, thank you so much for making me go down this road. Because again, I had never watched this film until prepping for this show. And as much as I've been, ripping on it a little bit, it wasn't a bad time. It was not a bad time because even in the worst of movies, there's still something to enjoy. But Peter, before we go, please take the mic, take the space, and let us know all about the Movie Duel podcast and where people can find it.
Yes, so I'm the host of the Movie Duel podcast. So I sort of take it in turns with what I call my movie duelists, which are Vanessa, Tarquin, Jamie, and Nicole, and they each sort of take it in turns to sort of battle it out with me on a chosen subject with certain films. For example, our latest episode that has just dropped is about the best film about addiction, in which we talk about Trainspotting and Requiem for a Dream. And probably by the time this episode drops, we'll be talking about our choices for best comic book movie that's not DC or Marvel, in which we talk about Sin City and Akira. And then we basically sort of, hash it out and see which one of our choices is the best. And you can find us on Facebook at Movie Duel Podcast, Instagram and Threads, all at the same handle, and at Movie Duel Pod on X. And you can get in touch with us at movieduelpodcast@gmail.com as well. And you will also find Mr. Jason here on one of our episodes, our guest episodes that we call Quick Draw, in which we get a guest on to talk about some of the movie duels of past and their choices for some of the subjects that we've talked about.
Oh, that was such a fun episode, too. By the way, you can also find that episode on our guest appearances page over at notthatbadcast.com. And I can't wait till if I ever get a chance to do another quick draw, because you mentioned comic book movies that are not Marvel and DC, and you missed a very, very important one there. So if I ever get to do that topic on a quick duel again, I am so prepared. But Peter, just know the microphone is always there whenever you want to hop on the show. You're always welcome here. Now, to you, our listeners, you guys know the drill. If there is a movie out there that you think is unfairly maligned or is just so bad that there is no way in Cruise Control that we can find anything good to say about it, hit us up on social media at NotThatBadcast or go to our website at NotThatBadcast.com. And while you're there, you can check out all of our other shows, including There Can Only Be One and Keep Watch Pass and the occasional Grading on a Curve episode. Peter, thank you so much again. Listeners, you guys are awesome. This is It's Not That Bad. Take care.
Hey folks, Stefan Shirazi and Renee Richardson here from the Metallica Report.
And we are proud members of the Pantheon podcast family, where the best of music and podcasts unite.
We've got something pretty cool for you. We're giving away an exclusive Metallica merch package worth over $250.
That's a whole lot of Scary Guys, skulls, M72, and other sought-after Metallica swag. And we've made it easy for you to win. Follow and share the Metallica Report, and you're in the game. Go to pantheonpodcast.com/Metallica, enter your email, and hit that button to be entered to win.
And just like that, you're eligible for our monthly exclusive Metallica merch package.
And guess what, rockers? You can enter every month, so just do it. And while we love our global brothers and sisters, the lawyers won't let us ship outside the U.S.